Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Beth, and in today's video I'm going to talk about the Natasha Denona Bloom palette. So I will be doing a demo of the eye look I have on now, as well as some up-close top-down swatches, and I will have timestamps down below if you'd like to jump to any of those sections. But I first wanted to address the question of whether Natasha Denona has lost her bloom. And I will explain what I mean by that for the non-English majors who have no idea what I'm talking about, because clearly we have a palette called Bloom right here. So for the English majors, you may have studied the book Persuasion by Jane Austen. And I just thought I would start off by reading a few kind of choice quotes to illustrate what I mean here. So the basic plot of Persuasion is there's a young woman named Anne Elliot, and prior to the book starting 10 or so years ago, she had formed an attachment with a certain gentleman, and their family members had basically persuaded them not to get married. So according to Wikipedia, Captain Wentworth was engaged to Anne in 1806, but the engagement was broken when Anne was persuaded by her friends and family to end their relationship. So then 8 years later, the book picks up, and it's basically kind of a second chance for both of them. So I do highly suggest reading it or watching one of the many wonderful adaptations. But to sum it up here, what I mean by bloom. So Jane Austen uses this language of Anne Elliot having lost her bloom in the 8 years since she and Captain Wentworth were first courting, I guess you could say. And keep in mind that Anne Elliot is 27 when the book takes place. So for the first example here, it says, "A few years before, Anne Elliot had been a very pretty girl, but her bloom had vanished early." She next says, 12 years had changed Anne from the blooming, silent, unformed girl of 15 to the elegant little woman of 27, with every beauty excepting bloom, and with manners as consciously right as they were invariably gentle. At one point in the book it says, she, meaning Anne, was looking remarkably well, her very regular, very pretty features having the bloom and freshness of youth restored by the fine wind which had been blowing on her complexion, and by the animation of eye which it had also produced. She also says, in person she was inferior to both sisters, and had, even in her bloom, only reached the dignity of being a fine girl. And then, the years which had destroyed her youth and bloom had only given him, meaning Captain Wentworth, a more glowing, manly, open look, in no respect lessening his personal advantages. She had seen the same Frederick Wentworth. And then finally it says, Anne's attachment and regrets had for a long time clouded every enjoyment of youth, and an early loss of bloom and spirits had been their lasting effect. So in short, Anne has aged. She is now in her horror of horrors, late 20s, and is no longer the fresh-faced young girl that she once was, and so she lost her bloom. But as some of those quotes discuss, the reintroduction of Captain Wentworth to her life has kind of freshened her up a little bit. Of course, as in our society today, men tend to get more dignified and handsome to a certain extent, while women are on kind of a slow decline, at least according to societal standards. So unfortunately, not much has changed in the last 200 odd years. So anyway, bringing that back to this Natasha Denona palette and why I think it's worth discussing. When I first saw this palette, I was a little underwhelmed by it. Even to quote Clueless, which is an adaptation of Jane Austen as well, perhaps just whelmed. Like, it didn't inspire any passion in me. It was kind of like, okay, it's another Natasha Denona palette. And I've kind of, I guess, resigned myself to purchasing most of Natasha Denona's palettes because I am a collector and I like to be able to cross-reference and do all of that. It's a little bit more of a professional interest than a personal interest, I guess you could say. But I thought it would be worth maybe just exploring the idea more generally of, because Natasha Denona has been a part of our kind of cosmetic lexicon, if you will, She has, I don't even know when her first palettes came out, probably 10 to 15 years ago at this point. And I was just looking on the Natasha Denona website, and I believe this is the 15th midi palette that she currently has on her site. So that's not even including any midi palettes that she might have discontinued. Yeah, I think I have at least 12 here within easy reach. So all that to say, I think the novelty and excitement may have worn off a little bit. I still think she does innovate, as we'll talk about when we do the swatches, in terms of formulations. It seems like she gives us kind of one more neutral palette for every more colorful palette. And I know those can be kind of different demographics, so she's trying to, I guess, make everyone happy. And some of these palettes are limited edition or they get discontinued. So I think it's a good thing for Natasha Denona to always have like a neutral palette in her lineup, to have some more warm options, to have some more cooler toned options. But at the same time, this isn't really anything that we haven't seen from her before. And unfortunately, I think just across all brands, we have a bias towards not only new products, but I think new brands. I think sometimes makeup artists coming out with lines, a lot of times they have certain ideas that they want to bring to market. They have a point of view to express, but at a certain point you can risk becoming kind of redundant and played out. We've seen that, I think, with the Pat McGrath Mothership palettes, and I think just Pat McGrath as a brand generally. She made quite the splash and was very exciting when she first launched, and she was bringing a lot of her artistry and everything to the brand. I don't think Natasha Denona has sold part of her company or brought on outside investors in the same way maybe that Pat McGrath or even Charlotte Tilbury has. I'm not quite sure about that. I don't know what their ownership structure is, but we haven't seen those headlines, at least, I don't think. So all that to say, I think it's very natural for, at this point in the brand's kind of life cycle, to feel a little bit of fatigue, weariness, just a lack of excitement maybe when new palettes come out. I don't think all brands should kind of cease operations after 5 or 10 years or anything, but I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up to kind of, I guess, psychoanalyze a little bit our response to this palette. I know a lot of people are very excited by it, and even those who look at it and think, okay, it's kind of boring or not really for me, you can still create some very pretty looks with it. And I don't necessarily think it was a bad addition to her lineup. I just don't think it wasn't really for me per se, for one thing. And then also, it's just not really blowing my socks off. So let's go ahead and get into the swatches in the demo, and I'll let you know whether I think you should buy it at the end of this video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the swatches. Okay, so let's do some up-close swatches by finish for the Natasha Denona Bloom palette. And I wanted to kind of start off by first talking about, I guess, the overall quality of the palette in terms of how it arrived to me. So I don't know if you'll be able to see, there are a few kind of slight, I think, blemishes on the packaging, which is never really a good sign. Some here as well. Not a big deal, but as you start to unwrap a palette and you see things like that, you start to worry about the integrity of these shadows. I did order from the Natasha Denona website, and as you may be familiar, these palettes are sent in this outer cardboard packaging with this inner packaging like so, and then there's also some large bubble wrap, and then it was sent in a padded FedEx mailer. So usually I never have any issues with Natasha Denona's shipping or how they package things, but as you can see on the front here, there's a few kind of little specks of things, and like I said, it's never really a good sign when you start to see that. I think fortunately the shadows themselves are intact. for the most part. There's maybe a tiny little bit of Equinox here that was a bit crumbled, I think, but hopefully I won't have any kind of issues with that shade. I just wanted to mention that. You can also see on the mirror there. So like I said, it's not the end of the world, and it's not to the extent where I feel like I need to reach out to them to get a replacement. But it's not really ideal either. So I thought what I would do, because I do like to swatch by finish, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the Roxa palette, which is to remove the pans from the packaging and swatch them that way, so you get kind of a visual representation of the shades outside of this palette. And part of the reason I like to do that as well is that I've taken pictures of all Natasha Denona MIDI palettes, at least the ones that have been released recently, and put them against this gray background, so that if you wanted more of a visual representation of how the palettes may differ in a way that isn't impacted by the color of the packaging, it's a little bit easier to compare that way. So yeah, like I said, unfortunately this packaging was not kind of immaculate, but obviously as you continue to use it, there are some imperfections. And I did quickly want to mention, I'll talk about the Roxa again and the mini eye sculpt when I talk about the formulations and finishes, but just to give you a look at the overall color story next to the I Need a Warm palette. So this is, I think, what a lot of people have mentioned in talking about the Bloom palette. So there's the Bloom next to the I Need a Warm. This color here is not all that different. I think it is different, but it's close. But in any case, I will have those pictures for you to look at. I'll probably post them as pictures on my Instagram. I have a reel up of all of the pictures in kind of video format, like a slideshow, just to make it a little bit easier. But obviously going forward, it's easier to include new pictures on a palette by palette basis. So I'll quickly show you how I do this, and then I'll probably speed through most of it. So I have this, it's a scrapbooking tool, but because there are holes on the back here, it's fairly easy to, let me go grab a paper towel. It's fairly easy to take this, push it through the hole. You want to kind of keep your eye on the other side so that you can pick up the pan when it's dislodged. And there's nothing on the back. These are just plain metal pans. So I will put these down in the same framework. And just to show you again, try and do it at an angle that you can see maybe a little bit better. So the hole is actually at the corner of the pans. So I just go like that until I've done that for the entire palette. Sometimes I do it kind of by row or by column, just to make sure I keep track of things before they're labeled. Oops. And try not to destroy the already slightly fragile one there. So it's interesting that all of these are kind of plain silver or solid metal pans, I guess you would say. So just to show you by contrast, the Roxa, I don't remember offhand. I'm pretty sure one of these was maybe Flutter in the top row there. Yeah. So you can see this one, this was a sparkling wet effect. Maybe it's that formulation that requires this type of pan. And for that one, you can see, hopefully, it's on a clear label, so it's not super visible. But I used a label maker to print it out because you can't really write on a surface like that. But there's a little hole in the middle as well, I think, that helps the product dry. So that was a sparkling wet effect. Like I said, I don't know if it's just that formulation that requires that kind of pan. The shade Brink, I think, is a sparkling foiled. And yeah, that one is a solid pan. So that one you can see I have the palette name, the shade name, and then the number and formulation. In case I ever wanted to combine, I'm gonna have that right there for a second just for reference. Yeah, so we'll talk about the kind of formulation breakdown in a minute. But what I do next for this is I just take an alcohol wipe here and just carefully remove any excess shadow that kind of got underneath. You could also use alcohol to remove. I just used like a normal Sharpie pen to write on the back, and if you decide you want to redo it or just remove it altogether for any reason, you can just take an alcohol wipe and it comes right off. And depending on how kind of messy things get, you might need more than one wipe. And I just got a fresh one just in case there's any like residual shadow that didn't fully come off. It's like the rinse cycle. So yeah, you can see definitely got a little bit there. Try not to move them around too much. You might get a little bit of the imprint from the paper towel pattern, but that would probably come off before too long. And then I'm just taking a makeup eraser. I'm using kind of a dry spot just to wipe away any of the isopropyl alcohol that hasn't already evaporated. It would evaporate fully if you gave it a minute, but. All right, so now that our pans are prepped, I can take my Sharpie and just use the back for reference. So some of those shade names are a little bit easier to fit on here than others. The palette name itself is short, which is a blessing. The ones like I need a nude, I need a warm, I abbreviated. So I'm actually going to start in the corner here. So I'll write Bloom and Equinox. And then this is 596 DC, which is a duochrome. So Natasha Denona numbers her shadows sequentially. So in this palette, we started at 582 in the upper corner, made our way to 596. And then the letters indicate the formulation. So this one is Bloom Clover 595 Creamy Matte. So again, I'll just speed through this. All right, so just by way of example, because I don't know, I don't like the way I did that M. If you're really picky about your handwriting or if you mess up. So I'll just show you how you can. So you can just take the alcohol wipe and it's good as new. Just want to make sure you kind of dry it off a little bit. Oops, another mistake. Did a 5 instead of an S. I was just going to say it is a little bit easier if you're kind of putting the pans back in the palette as you do this, or if you're just doing a row or a column at a time. But since I'm going to be swatching them by finish and rearranging them anyway, it doesn't really make sense. Okay, I think I barely got fluorescence on there. All right, so this one I can put back in. Okay, so what I want to do next is Organized these by finish, so I think we only have one metallic. We have quite a few creamy mattes, and this one, a couple duochromes. Some of this debris on the paper towel can transfer, so if you care a lot about that, just maybe get a clean paper towel. And then 4 sparkling foiled. Okay, so let's flip these. And then 2 silky mattes. It seems like the silky mattes are often lighter shades, which is kind of interesting. And these have kind of some similar creamy mattes. This rust color is super deep. All right, and then 1 metallic. 2 of the duochromes. 4 sparkling foiled, which is one of my favorite formulas that she's done. I'll talk about this a little bit more, I think, when we get to the silky mattes, but I don't think her formulation is in its flop era. I'm not as inspired by some of her color stories. Like, this color story isn't my all-time favorite that she's ever done, but I do like a lot of her more recent formulations that she's done. I like the silky matte formula. I don't, I guess, bemoan the absence of a lot of like metallic shades. Or her older matte formula. We still have plenty of that in this palette, for example. I think it was the Roxa palette where we had a lot of silky mattes in this palette. I think all of the mattes were silky matte and not the creamy matte formula. So all of the mattes in this palette, including, I think, Eclipse and Heather and Cerise. So all of these darker ones were in the silky matte formula. It's interesting that she is kind of playing around with what becomes a creamy matte versus a silky matte. If you saw on her Instagram, I think she started working on at least the artwork, because she did this watercolor painting that became the cover. I think she started working on it like over a year ago. So this palette has been in development for a while, before Roxa was officially launched. Okay, so let's get into some swatches here. So the first one here is the shade Keen, which is a peach shade, so peachy keen, I guess. And she describes this one as a matte, light medium, nude tangerine. So feels pretty good there. I'll go ahead and swatch the next couple before I kind of wash my fingers. This one, the shade Wren, is a matte medium coral pink. So that is Wren. I think Wren might be Japanese for lotus. I was kind of Googling some of these shade names before I filmed. Case in point, I think it's pronounced Flos, not Floss. This is, I think, the Latin word for flower. I never took Latin or anything, but I think that's what I looked up. And this is a matte medium vintage rose. So those are the first 3 there. So yeah, so you can see I kind of have a little bit of fallout because I try to pick up enough pigmentation for good swatches. Next up we have a little bit of, I think, the peach shade got on here. This is the shade Bark. which is a matte medium dark gingerbread brown. So that is Bark. And then we have, this one is Clover. It's a matte dark vivid burgundy. I believe this is the shade Brick, a matte medium bright terracotta. Not my favorite type of shade generally. And again, you can see some of the shadow that has kind of fallen off my fingers. They're swatching well, even though there's some fallout, I think. All right, so those are the creamy matte shades. And I think I'll do the silky mattes, and then I'll do the metallics separately, just so they're not too crowded. Okay, so for the actual silky mattes, like I said, it's interesting that we had so many silky mattes of various depths in the Roxa palette. These two shades of the Mini Eye Sculpt are also silky mattes. So I don't know if there's a rhyme or reason to why some are silky matte. But this is the shade Petal. It's a silky matte light salmon. It feels a bit drier than the creamy matte, which is interesting. I have already swatched a couple of the new Charlotte Tilbury palettes, and I talk about her, I think it's called Matte Silk formula or something to that effect. Silk and matte are both in the name of it. This is the shade Robin. It's a silky matte medium dusty coral. But anyway, I was comparing some of Natasha's silky mattes to the Charlotte Tilbury formula. I haven't posted or finished that video yet, but yeah, I have to say for this palette, I'm not sure. That one didn't swatch the best. That one felt a little bit dry. I feel like that's the kind of shade that she might have put in her cream to powder formula in her older palettes, but I'm sure there's some logic. I'm just not aware of the reason. All right, so those are all the mattes. So I will go wash my arm off, and then we'll do the metallics, sparkling foiled, and duochromes. So now that my arm is washed and mostly dry, the only metallic I have here is the shade Fluorescence, and I think this was the first one in the palette. So this is a metallic medium vivid tangerine. That is what Fluorescence looks like. Would have made sense to make that a duochrome, but it's a pretty shade. Has a nice reflect to it. So let's move on to the sparkling foiled, which I think, as I said, is one of my favorite newer formulations that she's done. So going in first to this one, the shade Crisp is a sparkling foiled duochrome coral with gold. So it's interesting. I guess we have sparkling foiled shades and also duochrome shades, but this one is under the sparkling foiled category. Hopefully you can see a little bit of that kind of effect. Okay, so moving on to the next one. I was going to do all of these at once, but I forgot. The shade Lush is a sparkling foiled light nude apricot. Like so. The shade Rue, which always makes me think of the Hunger Games and Ophelia. Rue metallic medium light burgundy. A little bit of a chunkier kind of texture there. And the other one here is Ember. Sparkling foiled medium brick. Don't drop it. Okay, so this is Ember. So these are pretty like, I think, as I've mentioned, this color story is not my all-time favorite. But it's going to be very wearable for a lot of people. All right, and then finally we have the duochromes. So I think the first one is the shade Fleur, which is the French word for flower. So again, not sure how these really are distinguishable from the sparkling foiled, that's a duochrome. The shade Equinox, which I think she took pains to kind of call out. This one is also it's also a sparkling foil duochrome. So we have one sparkling foil duochrome that is labeled SF and one that is labeled DC. So they don't feel all that different. This one maybe feels a touch thinner. But those are the kind of duochrome shades. That one, I think, reads the most duochrome. So let me give you the full picture. And we'll zoom in. All right, so there we have all of the swatches, and to put them back into the palette, it's as easy as figuring out where they go. So brick is in the middle. I like to be OCD and make sure that the writing is all kind of facing the same way. Bark. All right, so there you have it. So hopefully this was helpful. I think I'll probably tack a demo onto this palette the same way I did for my other kind of 12 days of palette videos, one of which was the Roxa palette. So if you want to check out a similar Natasha Denona video like this one, I'll have that linked in the cards and down below. But yeah, that's going to do it for the swatches. Let me know if you have any specific comparison requests, and I will try to put those up on either my Instagram or the YouTube community page. So with all that being said, let's go to the demo, I guess. All right, so let's get into the demo here. So I've already done the swatches as I'm filming this, so go ahead and remove the plastic. And I've already set and primed my lids as well. So I think to start off with, I'm going to take my Sigma Large Fluff E50 in the shade Petal, which is that lightest peach down at the bottom. So even though I set my primer with powder, I like just a little bit more of kind of a base shadow. Sometimes I'm not sure how pigmented a shadow will go on, but I think I could have set my primer with that shade. It's light enough. And then I'll take the Sonia G Classic Crease. So it's interesting, like the two rows at the farthest end here are a little bit more pink as I'm looking at it, and then this kind of nine pan section is a little bit more peach. So I'm trying to decide whether I want to lean a little bit more into the peach or the pink. I think I'm gonna go pink. So I'm gonna go into the shade Ren, which I think I said in the swatch portion, I think is the Japanese word for lotus. So there is Ren. So I'm going a little bit above my natural crease because I have hooded lids. So I want my eyes to look as lifted and open as possible. Okay, and while I am thinking about what I want to do next, I'm going to take my flat definer and I'm just going to go into Petal again and take that under the lash line. I did set my under eyes, but I feel like it never hurts to have a little extra insurance there to prevent creasing. And then I'll take my mini booster and I'm going to go into the shade Flows, I think it is, and just put that at the outer corner and create this kind of V or 7 shape. It's nice having such a large mirror to do your eye look. Sometimes when I'm doing my makeup just using like a compact or my small hand mirror, it's a little bit difficult to kind of get the full picture. So I'm going to take the classic crease again in the shade Red, which I used before, and go over what I just did to blend. I probably could have skipped adding any additional shadow, but so if I were just doing kind of an everyday look, I probably would have stuck to some of the lighter shades, not gone into Flows, maybe just stick to like Petal, Robin, that kind of thing. I'm going to go back into Petal with my classic crease and kind of run that around the edges to help with the blend and to give a little bit of a highlight. All right, so now that that is kind of mostly done, I'm going to take a Rephr 28 brush and go into the shade Rue. So with the exception of Petal, I'm so far sticking to the last 6 shades of the palette. So that is Rue. And I obviously did my base already. So we'll see how we do with Fallout. If I weren't filming it, I might have waited. But timing-wise, it's a little bit easier to just do the base first. So far not having any issues. I could feel a tiny bit of fallout, but I don't see that much. So I'll just take like a powder brush and just try to knock any of that away. I did already powder my face as well. Okay, so from there, I'm going to take the shade Equinox and I'll just flip the brush over and go over kind of the inner third and then blend. I wouldn't say it's worth buying a palette just for one shade necessarily, but if you are a Natasha Denona collector, I'd say this is a little bit more unique compared to what she's released in the past. So I'm just going to kind of blend that over that darker burgundy shade. And I think this shade does have a good amount of payoff. I think this one is labeled as a duochrome formula. Sometimes you have to be aware going in if you have like a topper shade, for example. Just know that you're not going to get a huge amount of kind of payoff. So I'm going to take this tiny little Rephr number 23 brush, I think it's a pencil brush, and go into the shade Crisp. Ideally, I would have a slightly larger brush here, but I don't feel like digging through my my brushes all that much. It might be for the best, actually. Yeah, and I think I'm going to take my flat definer again and go into the shade Ren. I think just to balance things out on the bottom a tiny bit. I think there's enough kind of rosiness that it doesn't look like my eyes are red when I do this. But let's see, what else can I do? I'm going to take my mini booster again and go into Clover and just put a tiny bit in the very outer corner. So this is going more into where my actual like socket bone is. And I'm kind of just stamping it so I have a little bit more control over where it's going. And then I'll take my crease brush again without any extra pigment and blend. So I think that's gonna do it for this eye look. I think anything else I did would just be kind of unnecessary at this point. So I'm going to hop off camera and do my liner, mascara, probably finish up with blush and that kind of thing, and then I'll be back to give you my final thoughts. All right, so we're back. So let me just quickly run through what I did. So I used the Bobbi Brown eyeliner, long wear cream liner stick in Rich Chocolate. I got this in my FabFitFun box, and I did see that this is going to be 50% off during the Ulta 21 Days of Beauty coming up. So I really do like this if I put the cap on all the way. Yeah, so I'm thinking of actually picking up maybe a couple shades of this when it goes on sale. So I have that. I also wanted to mention my Holy Grail Tarte Lights Camera Splashes will be 50% off the first day of the sale, I believe. So great time to try it if you haven't already. It's my Holy Grail for keeping the curl and lift to my lashes because I have very straight downward pointing lashes, and it has a good amount of volume. So that's why I love it so much. It's not going to be kind of the ultimate waterproof mascara, which if you need that kind of thing, if you're going to be swimming or crying a lot, I don't know if it's what I would recommend, but that also means that it's not impossible to remove. So yeah, wanted to mention that. Also have the Clinique Bottom Lash Mascara. I use the Rare Beauty blush in the shade Hope again. I have a review up on my channel for it. And I also used some products from Versed that I'm testing. So I applied some more of their Smoothing Lip Blush in the shade Reserve. And on top of that, I have the Tinted Lip Serum in the shade Gem, I believe. So that's what I have on my face as far as what I just applied. I'll have everything linked down below for you. But let's talk about this palette and whether I recommend it. So the cover artwork is beautiful. I really do like the design of it. So the reason I decided to purchase this was I basically purchased all Natasha Denona palettes at this point for review purposes and content. I really do like the kind of packaging that she does and the formulations. For me personally, this isn't my all-time favorite Natasha Denona palette. But if you are a fan of the color story and the kind of composition in terms of mattes and metallics or whatever appeals to you, then I don't think you'll be disappointed in this palette. Because this packaging allows you to mix and match and rearrange the shades, I think you do get a lot of value in that if you did want to kind of mix and match and create your perfect palette, or even just mix it up periodically to keep things fresh. You could definitely do that. And if I did want to create a peach or more burgundy eye look, then this would definitely be, I guess, the palette that I would reach for. It's not probably going to become like my everyday palette. I think I would still reach for the I Need a Nude over this palette for most things. But I don't think it's a bad buy. I just don't think it's a necessary buy. Not that any of this makeup is necessary, but hopefully that makes sense to you all. So I do have a code on the Natasha Denona website that will get you, I think, 15% off if you want to save some money that way. As I mentioned, I had a little bit of issues with, I guess, Natasha Denona's shipping this time around. I also did want to mention the rewards system that Natasha Denona has, although it's great, it can be a little finicky if you're checking out on their website. You might have experienced it in the past where if you log in through Shop Pay, I think it is, you don't get the full kind of checkout experience. So if you're having an issue applying any of your rewards money towards the cost of this palette, try logging out and then logging in without using Shop Pay. And hopefully that will take you to a checkout window where you can select your rewards. So I unfortunately did not apply any of my rewards money to this particular palette, but I guess that just means that that will be there for a future purchase. I do find it a bit frustrating that your like free shipping threshold is calculated after you apply discounts and rewards money, but I don't think that's entirely uncommon. We also will have the Sephora Spring Savings event coming up soon, so you could get it for, I guess, 20% off that way. And this palette is also at Ulta, if you would prefer to shop through Ulta, although they have their own shipping issues as well. So, I don't know. But yeah, hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I hope you guys are all doing well and staying safe in the current hellscape that we find ourselves in. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.